and I'm really looking forward to learning about this topic.
Great. Thank you for inviting me to today's discussion. I'm excited to share what I learned in my quest for the ultimate virtual help desk solution or hotline solution. As Nicole mentioned, my name is Kristen Klett. I am a program assistant for Charlotte Glenn in the North Carolina State Extension Master Gardener program. And pardon my clumsiness here, I'm working on 2 screens right now, and I normally just work on one. So it might take me, I have the presentation up on one and your face is up on the other. So before we get started, I'm curious to know what name does your state or program hotline or helpline go by? If you could put your answer in chat, I'd love to know what you call it. I see help desk. So many names. Help desk, Master Gardener hotline, plant clinic. Nothing specific. MG office, that's cool. Hotline, ask a Master Gardener. Okay. I've heard green line, phone line, also, or some other ones that I've heard. Help desk came up again. Ask extension. Okay, that's becoming, sounds like a standard term. Ask the expert. Okay, great. Well, I'll get started. Last year, at the onset of the COVID shutdown, many people and organizations found themselves tasked with transitioning their in-person programs and outreach to something that was virtual and remote. And the EMG hotline was no exception. So with my background in e-commerce and web strategy, I offered to research ways we might be able to take the EMG hotline virtual. So today I'm going to share with you some options to consider for virtual hotlines, my evaluation process, including how to establish your criteria and utilize scorecards, our chosen platform and how we're using it today, and then our vision and our hope for the EMG hotline in North Carolina. So for your concepts for virtual hotlines, this list by no means is representative of all your options, which I assure you will be an overwhelming number. When I was researching our choices, I found that they fell sort of neatly into 3 categories. The first is email delegation or shared inboxes. The second is project or team communication applications. And the third is help desk applications. So let's talk about what each of these are. Email delegation is where you give permission to other accounts or users to read, send, and delete email on behalf of another account. So Google actually offers this for free in Gmail and Workspace. I don't know if other email clients offer email delegation or what it might look like, but I can show you what it looks like in Gmail because NC State is a Google campus. And we actually use this for our NC EMG program email, our broader program email account. And we delegate access to that account to Charlotte, myself, and my colleague, Caroline. And so what that looks like in the settings of Gmail is you go to accounts and you simply grant access to your account to other individuals. So this works really well for our small team because our personal email addresses aren't the face of the program, and we can share the burden of fielding questions. This isn't a hotline, implementation or use case here. It's just how you can use email delegation. Could it work for you? It might be able to work for you. It sort of depends, I guess, on sort of your constraints. It's free, it's simple, and it's secure. So folks will log into their own email accounts to then access the accounts that they're delegates for. So they're not sharing usernames or passwords, they're using their own login credentials. But it has to be under the same domain. So if I'm delegating an ncsu.edu account, I can only delegate it to other ncsu.edu accounts. And it's the same thing for Gmail. You can actually use it in a free Gmail account, but I can only delegate other Gmail accounts, not a Yahoo account. And in Gmail, you're limited to 10 delegates. But with a school or organizational workspace account, you can have up to 1,000 delegates. So if your university or if you're in a Google workspace or Google campus allows you to issue email addresses for your volunteers, this could actually be a really nice, free, simple solution. And it could be powerful too if you paired it with something like Google Voice. So that would allow you to have phone calls and emails coming into one inbox. So that's one thing to consider. But we aren't able to use this because NC State doesn't allow our volunteers to have NC State email addresses, and I'm sure they have good reasons. So this just is a little bit too small for us. If we had to go to a free Gmail account, we would certainly exhaust those 10 delegates pretty quickly. The next class of applications I'll share with you is called shared inboxes or collaborative inboxes. This is a little bit of a tricky term because it's being used a little bit more broadly now. We looked specifically at applications that embed additional inboxes into your personal email. So you can see here that this is just an example or screenshot of a Gmail account. You have your personal inbox, and then you have another secondary inbox here, which is this shared inbox. There's some extra bells and whistles that you don't get in Gmail with this kind of extra layer added on top of it. But ultimately, we decided that it would be best if our help desk was standalone. We wanted to be external to our personal inboxes so that there's a clear boundary between our personal correspondence and our volunteer service correspondence. You can imagine that if somebody signs up to serve on the help desk one day a week or one day a month, having all of the other help desk correspondence kind of funnel into their personal inbox the other 6 days of the week or 29 days of the month could be a little overwhelming and aggravating. So that's just one of the reasons why we thought the boundary would be useful. And that's also the reason that this class of applications really didn't make it very far in our evaluation. And our concerns and preferences just might not be the same as yours. So if you don't have that concern, then this may be something that you may want to consider. All right, and then the next class we considered were project or team communication apps. And I saw somebody mentioned Trello in the chat earlier, and they're one of those applications. They are designed to help organize project, team communications, to-do list, files, and a whole lot more. They're really not intended for customer support, but because they're so flexible and feature rich, a lot of people will wire or bend these applications to manage other things like external communication and customer support. But it often involves piecing together multiple applications and integrating them together to meet your application. And you may or may not have the resources to make that happen. These apps often include an inbound email feature, so you can send something to a unique address that will trigger a new message or an action in that application. The internal team, the project team, can then discuss that response before it goes back to the sender. So it's really easy to get inbound email into these applications, but outbound email is not as straightforward. But I have heard about use cases where volunteers will generate a response to a question, and then someone like the agent or a more experienced volunteer will review that response before it gets sent out. So if there's sort of that, that threshold there where there's a review process in place, this system may work for you. And we'll get into that in a little bit. The field of project and team communications is really huge. I put Trello and Slack in here as examples because they've been around for a really long time. They're very well respected in their industry, and they give very generous nonprofit and educational discounts. I did not include screenshots of these applications, but I'm happy to show you what they look like a little bit later in our discussion if you'd like. And then the final class of applications that we considered were help desk applications. And so these are off-the-shelf applications or a platform that is usually multiple applications in one. They're designed to give customers access to someone who can support their needs. So most of you, whether you know it or not, have probably already used this type of application as a customer. If you've ever requested a refund or maybe a status update on an order with an online merchant, chances are your inquiry was sent through an application like this. They're usually pretty cost prohibitive because they employ what's called user-based pricing model. So that's a per user per month price. So $10 per user per month, and that can add up really quickly. But don't worry, there are some really good free ones too. They're just free with limits. So currently there are over 420 vendors in this market and growing. I think when I was researching this last year, I saw maybe 250 vendors in this market. So it's a pretty big jump in a year's time. And I want to just take a quick terminology pit stop before we go any further. So we're going to talk about apps and SaaS, these two terms. And it might sound silly to discuss, what is an app, but I recently had a conversation with somebody who just assumed that all apps were on your phone. And that's just not the case. So an app is simply a piece of software that allows you to perform a specific task, and it can be delivered on your phone, on your computer, in a web browser, in multiple places. So one provider may have a desktop app and a web-based app and a mobile app for one piece of software. And Slack is actually a great example of that, where they deliver these experiences in different platforms or different interfaces. And that's great to have because you may have a diverse age population and diverse user preferences, and it's helpful to have software or applications that exist in each of those places where your users or your volunteers may prefer to engage. So that's just one thing to think about when you're thinking about apps. And then SaaS stands for services as software. It's really just the delivery of software over the internet rather than it being installed on your computer. And the billing for these types of for this type of software or this type of market is usually a subscription-based billing rather than a one-time fee. In 2021, the SaaS market was estimated to be $145.5 billion. It's enormous. And some SaaS household brands that you may recognize include Zoom, Netflix, Spotify, and Intuit. These are what you would call business to consumer SaaS applications. So why am I sharing these terms? Well, when you're shopping for tech, it's really important to have a solid understanding of the terms that they'll be referencing frequently. And keep in mind, because the market is so big and changing so rapidly as almost all technology does, it's likely that your options today will be different than they will be in 3 to 6 months. And the applications today will have new features in 3 to 6 months or even shorter, maybe next week. So it's important to not look at this market or what your options are today and then just walk away and think that there's nothing out there for you. There may be something for you in time. So how do we make sense of all of this? All I'm going to share next is the evaluation process that we use to determine the app that was our best fit. And so first, we established our baseline criteria. Then we researched our options. Then we did something called feasibility testing. Then we refined our criteria. We came back to it. And then we did some final testing and evaluations. And I'll walk through each of these steps real quickly just to sort of show you what they look like. So when you establish your baseline criteria, you want to define what your non-negotiables are. This doesn't need to be an exhaustive list. It's just a starting point. So for our program, we knew that we needed a free or heavily discounted program for education. We knew that we wanted a central from contact, so no personal email or contact information is disclosed in the correspondence with the public. We knew that it had to be approved by university IT, and we knew that individual authentication, so no sharing of usernames or passwords, was critical. And we really, really wanted, although you could argue whether or not this was a non-negotiable, we really wanted sidebar conversations. So this is the ability to collaborate sort of on the side about a piece of communication without the client seeing it. And that's super helpful. So I want to pause here and ask all of you, does your program allow your volunteers to respond directly to the public's questions, or do you have a review process in place? Is there somebody who reviews your volunteers' correspondence before it's sent? So if you could answer that in chat, I'm super curious to know. Direct, awesome. Direct to public, great. Someone can respond directly, but they're able to be reviewed before sending, review process. Okay, so it looks like mostly so far they're direct, some reviews. Okay, Nicole says they have an admin email account that allows volunteers to access it, and they can save the responses as templates. That's super helpful. If they're a trainee, they're reviewed first. Okay, so some folks have sort of a hybrid process. That's great. All right, cool. So this is something to keep in mind because it helps you establish what your criteria is, what your baseline needs are. If you need to have a review process in place, if that's critical, then you need to put that into your baseline criteria. And you can also ask, is it necessary to keep that? So whatever your answer is, just let that be a guide in establishing your criteria. So the next, you're going to research your options. And when you're starting from scratch and you don't know what you're looking for, Google can sometimes feel like a really big black hole. So fortunately, though, we have some help here, and there are two websites that I would like to share with you that can be really helpful when it comes to technology. And that is Capterra and G2. These are software review sites, so they will show you classes of software, show you their competitors, allow you to filter for software based on price points, features, that sort of thing. They just help you cut out a lot of the guesswork. And if you sort of have one piece of information that you can put into either of these sites, it will open up a lot of doors for you because it will give you sort of the industry's keywords and reference phrases that they use. Then you can plug back into Google to make sure you have all of your bases covered. So I highly, highly recommend using Capterra and G2. This is just a screenshot of what Capterra looks like. And you can see this is the help desk software category. And it has 421 products. And you can filter based on the features, the pricing options, how it's deployed. So this would be like, is it web-based? Do they have a mobile app? Do they have a desktop app? That sort of thing. So highly recommend using a website like this. And then when we felt like we could search no more, after we went through looking at Capterra and G2 and Google, we selected 5 different applications that met our baseline criteria. And then we did a feasibility test. In feasibility testing, you're going to sign up for a free trial for these applications, and you're going to look at them firsthand. I would encourage you to invite a colleague or two to get their initial impressions, but you don't want to spend a lot of time here. So I said, do you want to make it like kudzu, make it quick? Ask yourself very quickly, does the app meet your baseline criteria? You should know this super quick, just in the first probably 10 minutes of a trial. Does it deliver the features and functionality, or any features and functionality that you should consider adding to your criteria? And we'll get into that next. Is the app or the app's market segment a decent overall fit? And is it easy to use? And this is super important because usability is really key for adoption. If it's hard to use, then your volunteers are not going to use it. And then you just move on from the feasibility testing. And then you're going to look at refining your criteria. So here we used a scorecard approach, and it might seem a little bit upside down to do sort of any testing before you finalize your criteria, but let me explain why I recommend this order. When we considered applications from related but different markets, and they could all potentially serve as a virtual helpline. And when it comes to new tech, sometimes the features and functionality that you need are unknown until you poke around the application, especially if it's brand new. And once you've discovered those features, you might determine that they address a really important need of yours. And so using what you learn from your feasibility testing, you're going to build out a more refined criteria list. and then you'll weight those requirements based on their level of importance. So our scorecards they may look complex, but they're not, I assure you. They were developed using a 100-point system, and we had 16 different criteria that were categorized into 6 different groups. And then we weighted each group and each individual criteria, giving it a point value that reflected its level of importance to our overall goals and needs. So I'm going to give you a closer look at our criteria and at our scorecard. And I'm going to point out a few things that were not on here until after our feasibility tests. Oops, let me go back here. There we go. All right. So outside of the inbox, this was going back to those sort of shared inbox or collaborative inbox. I have these highlighted in yellow. We didn't really know. We thought they sounded like a great idea. And then when we did the feasibility test of these shared inboxes, we hit the brakes really quickly because we were so overwhelmed with what our personal inboxes look like when we put those extra layers into our Gmail, that we knew that our volunteers may have the same reaction. So making it outside of the inbox actually became one of our criteria, having a separate interface for our help desk. Flagging and tagging. This was a feature that we didn't really know about until we did our feasibility testing, and we saw that we could tag our inquiries and incoming messages with certain keywords, and then we could actually parse through that data to see what keywords or what tags were most common. Making sure that it's that the platform or application allows you to have photos and videos. So much of what our public sends us in terms of questions involves visual files added to their email or whatever it is that they're sending into us. And so making sure that you can clearly and easily see any photos or videos that are sent was really important. And then system distractions. This was another one that we didn't really think about until we did the feasibility testing. And HubSpot, which is on the next slide, it was one of those systems where it offers so many different things. It's a huge platform. It does sales and marketing and customer service support, and all of those features and applications are all in the same interface, and you can't turn them off even if you're not using them. And so we called the system distractions because our volunteers were able to click on them, but they led nowhere. And it was really hard to find your way back to where you needed to be. And we felt like the vulnerability to just sort of getting lost in the system wasn't something that we wanted. So we wanted to make sure that there were no system distractions or minimal system distractions as part of our refined criteria. So this is what the final scorecard looks like. And your program, as I've mentioned before, may have different priorities and criteria altogether. If you like the way this looks, you can download, I'll include the link to this template that you can use with the slides, and you can adjust it to fit your needs. But I really do believe that these assist in objective decision-making, because I had a preference for a personal bias, I would say, for something like Trello, but really it wasn't our highest scoring application. So I do think that that these are super helpful in sort of making sure that your personal biases aren't factored into your decision-making. And then finally, you'll test and evaluate. And so this is, again, very, very simple. It wasn't complex. It was just a series of yes or no questions, really, for our scorecards. And if the application had a yes for most of these questions, then it got all the points. And if it had a no for this criteria, then it got 0 points. Then we added them all up, and our top scoring application was the one that we decided to move forward with. So it was really that simple. And you can see here, we have Freshdesk, which was 83. Freshdesk is a help desk for customer support platform. HubSpot, which is similar to Freshdesk, that had all those system distractions was a 68. And then Trello scored an 80. And then last year I did a poster and a companion website for all of these scorecards and our evaluation process and the findings for each platform. So if you're interested in looking at that, you can go to go.ncsu.edu/helpdesk-eval, excuse me. So we'll talk about our chosen platform. As you saw, Freshdesk was our top scoring platform. It came the closest to having everything we needed out of the box. Its biggest disadvantage was that the free plan would not support scaling our state program to include all of our counties. So in the free plan, if we were to deploy it across the state, all of our volunteers could see all of the tickets regardless of their topic or the intended county. In a paid plan, we could actually leverage more features and do some really in-depth customizations, but their pricing model is just cost prohibitive for us. So this is where I had mentioned earlier, there are some really good free options, but they're free with limits. So we would like to do more with it, but we just can't afford to. So we're actually not using it as a virtual helpline or hotline, but we are using it on a daily basis for an alternative purpose. We use Freshdesk to provide support for our volunteers that are serving in administrative roles for our new NC EMG volunteer intranet. So this is a volunteer to volunteer interaction rather than a volunteer to public interaction. And I'll show you some of the screenshots of the inside of Freshdesk so you can get a feel for what it actually looks like. All right. So this is the Freshdesk Dashboard. This is what you would see when you first log into your account, and you can authenticate to Freshdesk using Google. And there's a few other what they call single sign-on. You'll see SSO listed as a term in some pieces of tech, but you can use Google to authenticate or sign in to Freshdesk, which I really like because I don't like having lots of different usernames and passwords. And this is what you see first is the dashboard view, which is just a summary of what's happening in your help desk. It shows you the number of unresolved tickets. If you want to have a to-do list, you can see that. You can see recent activity. It just gives you an overview. And then the next thing you'll see is a ticket list. So over here on the left side, you see that this is sort of the navigation for Freshdesk, and each of these icons is a different view. And in the ticket list, you can filter based on the person. An agent is what they call a support person in Freshdesk. You can see all of the tickets. You can filter based on tags, based on people, based on the status. And then you can even modify some parts of the ticket right here. So you can modify its status. You could modify the person that it's assigned to. You can open or close the ticket or resolve the ticket. You could add tags to the ticket. So that's a super useful, quick way to sort of apply different actions to each of the tickets or the inquiries or emails that come into Freshdesk without having to go into each ticket or open each ticket to take those actions. And then this is what an individual ticket looks like. It looks a lot like email. And so if you want to reply to a ticket, you simply open up the response, but then it gives you the option to either add a note or forward that ticket. And if you're adding a note, this is that sidebar commentary or that sidebar collaboration where you can notify a colleague or notify someone else on your team that you think might be able to verify your answer or that might have more expertise on a subject matter than you do. And then you could also make that note, you can make it public or private. So if you didn't care if the customer or the client saw your note or that you wanted them to know that you were bringing in a subject matter expert and they were going to weigh in on their question, then you can make it public, and then everybody that's involved in this particular ticket could see those responses. And the interface is really simple. It looks familiar, right? It looks like what you would typically see if you were composing an email. And then this is an administrator's view of what they call tags. And so this is what I mentioned earlier, where if you were to consistently use tags on tickets, then you can use that data to reveal some common questions or where an urgent need might be. I think it would be really cool to use this kind of data to support the need for certain types of publications or pest alerts. For example, if we had an overwhelming number of inquiries for basal downy mildew, for example, you could make sure that all of the publications about that topic are front and center at all of the access points where the public engages with our organization. So they could have publications on websites, we could point to them on social media, we can make sure that we have handouts ready at any of our public events, that sort of thing. And then finally, one of the things that we've been sort of using a little bit with Freshdesk is our automation possibilities. So if you have an agent or a very experienced volunteer, you can set up rules that alert specific people or a specific person if an inquiry comes in regarding that topic. So it's just an if-then relationship. So if something comes in that matches these conditions, then I want somebody to be notified. And it's really that simple. So there's so many possibilities with customer support software. There are a few other things that I haven't shown in here. One is knowledge bases, which can be used internally or externally. Most companies use knowledge bases as sort of a self-service support sort of interface. So if they have frequently asked questions, that might be their first line of defense is go here and look for your answer. And if you still can't find it, then contact us. But our interactions with the public, our volunteers' interactions with the public are really, really valuable. And so we don't want to direct them to a self-service site. I would argue that we shouldn't direct them to a self-service site. But we could use knowledge bases just as a library of resources and content that we most commonly reference as our responses to the public. So as Nicole mentioned, they have templates in their email that then folks can reference or use to help them answer questions. So it would be a very similar approach to that. And then another really nice feature that is in a lot of these customer service or help desk support platforms are multi-channel support. And what I mean by that is you might have inquiries coming in from multiple places, from your phone, from your email, from social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And these platforms usually allow you to have all of that come into one place. So if you can imagine having all of those inquiries coming in as tickets, and then you can respond to them from one central location is a really efficient way to handle all of the questions that might be coming in from the public. So I'm really proud to say that our user feedback for using this for our current purpose for just support for our new intranet is overwhelmingly positive. And that is coming from the folks that are providing support inside of Freshdesk. So we've been using it, I would say, for about maybe 10 months now, and folks are very, very happy with it. All right. So our vision for North Carolina was that we could ultimately have a statewide help desk that we could and provide access to something like Freshdesk to all of the counties across the state. So in this model, an inquiry would come in, and then it would get routed to the appropriate county, and then the local volunteers in that county would respond to the ticket. And we envisioned having at the state level, quantifying all of our contacts, being able to get this insightful data regarding our topics of interest from the public. And we envisioned having a knowledge base that could be available to folks across the state, at least our volunteers across the state. But with a state-based approach, it's a paid solution, and we can't afford that, as I mentioned before. But the good news is that counties, if they were to use this individually, so there'd be no connectivity between the counties or to the state, but counties could actually have this implemented individually as their help desk solution, and it would probably fit most everybody's needs. So a virtual help desk really allows your volunteers to engage with the public from anywhere they have an internet connection. And given the maturity and of the market itself of help desks, customer support, the shared inbox and collaborative inboxes and team communication platforms and how they can overlap with our hotline needs or help desk needs, we really have, I think, a wonderful opportunity to modernize this area of volunteer engagement. And there are so many ways to accomplish it. So I am curious if if there's anybody out there that has gotten any ideas from what they've seen today, or if there's anybody that already has ideas about how they're going to accomplish taking their hotline or their helpline virtual. And so with that, I'll open up to questions and we can poke around in some other software if you guys would like.
Hey, Kristen, Brenda had a question in the chat box. She's
Yes.
wondering if photos and videos could be included.
Yes,
on the
absolutely. They can be. So with Freshdesk, and I failed. I'm sorry to put this in the slides, but the way that people send inquiries into Freshdesk right now is that they just send an email. So we have Freshdesk has sort of like a forwarding function. So they give you an email address and we have everybody send their inquiries to that email address. It has Freshdesk in it, I believe. Freshdesk is in the domain name. So if you didn't want that to be the case, you could forward a Gmail address or anything else to your Freshdesk email. And so because it functions as email, any attachments or images that are embedded come through just like they would in an email. And feel free to unmute and ask questions if you guys would like. I've got, let's see. I've got a few other tabs open over here. If you would like to see Freshdesk or Trello, sort of the quick feasibility test that I did in Trello. I saw somebody else was using Trello, and I think I've heard a few other use cases of Trello being used for hotlines. And then I'd be happy to share this survey data from the survey that we sent out before the discussion today. My interest was piqued with some of the questions. I wasn't expecting some answers or some of the data to come in the way that it did. So, okay, good questions coming in here. Do you have a specific person who's checking phone calls from the public, and how do you add it to your virtual help desk? So Freshdesk is one of those platforms that has multiple pieces to it. So they have something called Fresh Caller, and so you can add voice to your help desk. We don't currently have that added into ours, and I'm not sure if that would change the price point or not. But most of these, well, I shouldn't say most of them. A lot of them, most of them have free trials. Freshdesk and HubSpot have what they call forever free accounts. Now, I can't say that all of the features will always be part of the free account, because they have a right at any point in time to change what they make available for free. But they have promised that they will have some level of their software available for free. So I know that with Google Voice, if you were to pair that with Gmail, it would come, your phone calls would come through as transcripts if you got a voicemail. And then there's a Google Voice app you can put on your phone that will allow you to mask your phone number if you needed to call somebody back. So that would, preserve some privacy there. You could also open up, I think, your Google Voice app and use it to receive incoming calls during a specific time frame. So I know that's not Freshdesk, but I would imagine that the Freshdesk Fresh Caller is probably similar, functions similarly to Google Voice. What is the ballpark pricing for a statewide system? It really depends on the number of volunteers you would want to be part of that. So, a lot of these systems start, I would say the cheapest one I've seen starts at maybe $12 per user per month. And so, if you wanted, I don't know how many volunteers folks have serving on their help desk. If it's a small number and you were to do something, like I know some of the Ask an Expert involvement is a much smaller cohort of people. But we envisioned doing this, like making it available. We have 84 counties in North Carolina that have Master Gardener programs. And so 84 counties, and then we'll say, I don't know, 10 to 20 different volunteers at a minimum in each of those counties that might need access to the help desk at any one time. So that number can get pretty expensive if you add that all up. Missy asked, could you review again how you define an agent in your Freshdesk system? So an agent is anybody who provides support. So basically your customer support person is an agent. And that was one of the things that we kind of struggled with Freshdesk, is that you're not, and a lot of systems are like this. They have specific labels for people and for just different areas of their application. And it's unusual for an app to allow you to relabel those or customize those labels. And I was really hoping that we could change the term agent to something else, to volunteer. But we can't. So because our organization uses the word agent differently, we were a little bit worried about there being some confusion there. And that's just something that, if you decided to use Freshdesk, you'd have to work around. Peggy said, we chose Freshdesk, but you aren't really using it for inquiry and intake because of the cost. Well, we just haven't, right. So we're not using it at the statewide level. And we actually were investigating getting a full-time staff person with NC State to support the use of Freshdesk for our counties. And that did not move forward. Had that moved forward, we might have been able to explore this a little bit more. It doesn't mean that we're not going to use it for our help desk solution. It's just that we can't implement it at the state level for our counties. But we could potentially provide support or make a recommended approach for the county-based help desk, if that makes sense, because that can be implemented for free, but we are not in a place where we have enough resources where we could actually implement it for them. We might be able to answer some questions for them and give them a little bit of guidance, but we wouldn't be able to take that on. And then Nate asked, if we don't use Freshdesk, what do we use? Well, it's up to the individual counties. So I apologize if folks thought that we were gonna get into what we're actually using for our help desk. You can absolutely use Freshdesk for your help desk, but we just don't dictate what our counties can use. We simply can make recommendations. Have we looked at Libra or Google Forms for the virtual help desk? No, we haven't. And there are some really cool integrations that you can use with Google Forms. And I think, Aaliyah, I'm not sure if you're the one that also said that you were using Trello along with Google Forms, but that would be an interesting system to set up. So again, there are some really clever ways to set up help desks or to make this work really for free or for a small investment. But some approaches just involve more technical resources than others. And so because Freshdesk was an out-of-the-box application, you can literally just set it up, invite people to join, and you're off the ground and running essentially once you have that email address. You don't have to piece anything together. It just works out of the box, and that's really nice. But there's a price tag if you want to use some of the more refined features of Freshdesk. So
Kristen, if you're using Freshdesk more in a way to communicate among volunteers and internally, like how often do people use it and what kinds of functions are they using it for?
So we're essentially using Freshdesk as a help desk. It's just not being used for public gardening questions, if that makes sense. It's being used to field questions and provide support for folks that have technical questions about our intranet. So it's just a different audience and a different, I guess, overall topic. But it's still a help desk. So I actually have it up over here. Hopefully you guys can still see this. This is the inside of Freshdesk. And I didn't want to, actually, can we stop recording, Nicole? Is that okay? Because there's some personal information in here I don't necessarily want to be on YouTube.